And hello, everyone. Welcome to our Energy, Careers and Leadership series for spring of 2022. And happy Go Texan Day. And in honor of the rodeo, you will see that our topic for today's session is from raising cows to removing carbon, a personal sustainability journey. And I couldn't have planned that better if I'd tried. Anyway, welcome. This is the Energy, Careers and Leadership webinar series organized by Energy and the Energy Coalition here at the University of Houston, and also co-presented by the Texas Industrial Energy Efficiency Program. Next slide, please. I'm Alan Rossiter with Energy. Next slide, please. And I guess at this point, I'll remove my hat because it doesn't balance very well on top of my headset. The series, as most of you know, consists of a total of 6 webinars. We have the speakers displayed here for the first 5. And today we are at speaker number 4, who is Sharon Nolen from Eastman Chemical. Now, I think I mentioned last week in the webinar, a large part of my career, most of my career, was really spent in the industrial energy efficiency field. And a name that I kept hearing throughout that career was the name of Sharon Nolen. And I eventually got a few years back, well, quite a few years back now, to collaborate with her on a couple of writing projects. And just last year, for the first time, I met her face to face. And based on that, I could not but invite her to present here in our series, because I'm sure you're going to really enjoy what she has to say. She comes obviously from an industrial perspective. Many of you are not really working in degrees like or engineering degrees or things like that. However, you will see that what she has to say is highly relevant to what we're doing in the energy and sustainability space. I will say no more about Sharon, just to mention, though, that next week's speaker is someone that I think many of you already know, Jane Stricker, who is the SVP and Executive Director for the Houston Energy Transition Institute with the Great Houston Partnership. So today's going to be a great session. We have another great session coming up next week, so make sure you're here for that as well. Next slide, please. I usually include a slide here for people who are certificate candidates, and I've modified the slide a bit this time because I've had a number of questions from people about the program, and I want to do some clarifications. Any enrolled student at any institute of higher learning is potentially eligible for the certificate. However, you must include your institution name and your student ID when you register for the program in order to be included. Also, when you join our sessions, you must use your unique personal Zoom link for the webinars. Just for the record, that allows us to track the fact that you did indeed join the webinar. You need to activate your course in Canvas, and you need to participate in at least 4 of the webinars in real time. In other words, in the live meeting when it is happening. And again, this is largely because we need to be able to verify the fact that you're here in order to qualify you. We realize, though, that some people do have schedule issues, and we can provide limited waivers for you so that you can actually use the recordings rather than the real-time event. However, we need to know in advance, because in order to track and verify, we need to know that. And so, yes, when you go to Canvas, Big Brother is watching. I am able to see where you go when you're in Canvas. So just for the record. So we do need to know, but we do need to know in advance in order to do that. And then the third thing, or the final thing here, point number 5, you need to complete each test for the series before the following webinar. And the passing grade is 80% on each of those tests. And for those who are in the live meeting, I did put a link to the course website. Those of you who are viewing this from a recording, the QR code should take you to that same site. Next slide, please. So an upcoming event, and I mentioned this last week, but just in case anyone missed it then, UH Energy will be organizing or is organizing a hydrogen symposium on April the 17th. Again, I've put the link in the chat and there's a QR code there. This is going to be a great event, especially for anyone who is interested in in hydrogen specifically, but the energy transition in general. So please do come. All right, next slide, please. Just one final thing before I pass this along. Please stay muted with your video off during the webinar. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and we will deal with them when we can. And at this point, next slide, please. I would like to introduce our moderator for today, who is Uchenna Ube, who is the Vice Chair of the Energy Coalition. So Uche, over to you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Dr. Allen. Good morning, everyone. This is Uchenna Ube. I'm currently a fourth-year PhD student at the University of Houston, and I'm currently serving as the Vice Chair of the Energy Coalition. Next slide, please. Yeah, so who are we? So the Energy Coalition is the largest energy-focused student organization in the U.S. So we
Uche, you have an echo there. Do you have two microphones on?
Okay. Is it better now?
Yeah, that is better. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, so we are the largest student organization on campus with over 5,000 members campus-wide. And also we have 8 colleges, 35 student organization, and 30 majors that are part of the Energy Coalition. So in summary, we're just a one-stop shop for students to, bridging the gap between students and industries here in Houston. Next slide, please. So if you want to be a part of the Energy Coalition, we're doing a lot of amazing things. We have a lot of upcoming events, which you can also be a part of. You can actually please scan the QR code on the side to check out what we're doing. We have upcoming event like last Wednesday we had the Pool Talk, which was the networking event connecting students and industrial experts. That happened last Wednesday. Also, we have the career readiness section also coming up, and the Crawfish Bowl also coming up, the Energy Symposium also coming up, and ultimately Energy Banquet, which is our biggest event for the calendar year. So you don't want to miss out on any of these events. So please scan the QR code, and Dr. Allen will also be dropping a link on the chat where you can also be a part of the coalition. Next slide, please. All right, so without further ado, we want to introduce the speaker for today, Sharon Nolen. Sharon Nolen is an Eastman Fellow. She's also a leader, a global natural resources management program, and also she's also the Eastman chemical. She works at the Eastman Chemical Company. So without further ado, Sharon, please take the floor.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation to be here with you today. So just to introduce myself a little bit, in addition to what's listed here, I spent most of my 34-year career at Eastman in utilities division and engineering division, but really my career took a new trajectory in 2010 when I was asked to lead the Worldwide Energy Program. So today I'm going to be talking about my experience as the energy manager leading our energy efficiency program, and then I'll transition to more talk about the future and what I'm doing today around sustainability and decarbonization. Next slide. So when you saw my title of my presentation, I wonder what you thought it was going to be about. Did you think it was going to be about mass transportation? Did you think it was going to be about living off the land? Well, in reality, I'm going back to my childhood. When I think about sustainability, I often like to say that I feel like I learned almost everything I needed to know about sustainability growing up on a beef cattle farm in Middle Tennessee. So I was born to parents who were born during the Great Depression, and I think the lessons of that generation influenced many of us, including who I am today. And so I want to talk about how the lessons I learned as a child have really translated into my work with energy efficiency. And I'll talk about that in the first half of my presentation and then transition to decarbonization. Next slide. So a few words about Eastman. You may or may not be familiar with Eastman. We have very few products that you can go into a store and buy, but we make many chemicals, fibers, and plastics that go into things that you use every day. We have a rich heritage. We actually are a company that's over 100 years old. We began in 1920 in Kingsport, Tennessee, which is where our largest plant site is. And I think some of the decisions that were made very early in our company really paid off in terms of how we think about sustainability today. In many cases, we made decisions to be self sufficient. So, for example, decisions were made early on that we would manage our own waste. So, later, when many chemical companies were involved in things like Superfund sites, we did not have those problems. Another thing I can say about Eastman is that we have very much a culture of continual improvement, and that certainly lends itself well to energy efficiency. Next slide. So I'd like to do a brief review of energy efficiency at Eastman. So as I mentioned, our largest plant site began in 1920. And in that very first decade of operation, we installed our first combined heat and power plant. If you're not familiar with combined heat and power, it is where we make steam and electricity together. It's a very efficient way to make the energy we need for our processes. So you could purchase electricity from the grid and make your own steam, but it's not nearly as efficient. And you may wonder why we need steam. Well, electricity does not give us the heat that we need for many of our chemical processes. And so we need steam at higher temperatures and higher pressures to do that. But I don't know all the history of combined heat and power, but I believe this must be one of the earliest combined heat and power plants in the country. So as I mentioned, we have a history of continual improvement. So over time, we certainly considered energy efficiency and energy management and how to run our processes more efficiently. Things really changed for us though in 2008. We joined EPA's Energy Star Industrial Program, and in 2010, we joined the Department of Energy Partner Program. That is when I became the energy manager. So I was actually a department manager in utilities division, managing our distribution services department for our largest site in Kingsport. I was asked to begin leading the worldwide energy team. And because of things I learned through Energy Star and DOE, I really saw that we could be doing much more than we were doing. And so I brought all that back to Eastman, and in 2014, energy efficiency became my full-time job. So we really changed things and revamped the program. And then over time, we saw that we continued to improve our energy management program through things such as a dedicated annual capital energy budget. I'll talk more about that later. In 2014, we also upped our commitment to the Department of Energy and became a Better Plants Challenge partner. During that same time frame, we began to value energy efficiency, not just for more efficient operations or reduced cost, but a recognition that energy efficiency is the first lever for decarbonization. So we began to value it in addition to meet our greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. In the same time frame, we became more aware of the energy-water nexus and realized that many of the things we were doing in energy efficiency could be applied to water stewardship as well. And then eventually all this came under our Sustainability Council. Next slide. So now I'd like to talk about some of the lessons from my childhood and how they relate to energy efficiency. So, I'm sure many of you ride a bike, and when you learn to ride a bike, you don't forget how. Even if you don't ride a bike for months or years, if you have the opportunity to ride a bike, you can get on and you can still ride. Just because that has become integral to who you are, it's not something you have to think about every day. And the lessons I talk about, I think, are very similar to that. They're really things I think that were ingrained in me as a child, and that I see the correlation between these things and sustainability. So I'm going to be talking about these 4 lessons learned and how those translated to our energy efficiency program. Next slide. I'll start with help your neighbor. Growing up on the farm, it was only natural that if we had extra vegetables that we'd grown, we shared those with our neighbors. If our neighbors were going to be out of town and needed help taking care of their farms, we pitched in and helped. So those were very local efforts, but energy efficiency is much more of a global effort. So I mentioned that we became an Energy Star partner, we became a Better Plants Challenge partner. Both of those programs offer a lot of benefits and resources to help companies reduce energy use. One of the things that they offer is a network of other industrial energy managers. So this has been something that's been very valuable, and also something I've really enjoyed as part of my career is the opportunity to network with energy managers at different companies. So the photograph you see there is me visiting Al Hildreth. He's the energy manager at General Motors. You may think that a chemical company and an automobile company don't have a lot in common, but when it comes to sustainability and energy efficiency, there are a lot of things that we can share. So I had heard that GM had done water conservation projects. I was in the area for something else, and so I was able to meet Al, and he showed me the work that they had done in water conservation. We also became an Energy Star Partner of the Year, winning that award for 8 years in a row. And as our name became more known, many companies wanted to learn, what are we doing with energy management? And we were happy to share that. In particular, it's gratifying when we can share that with our customers and our partners, because as we begin to look more across the value chain related to greenhouse gas emissions, where we see value in that coordination and cooperation with our suppliers and our customers. Next slide. The second lesson is to live within your means. Use less. So when we think back to those values of the Great Depression, people did not want to have loans. People didn't want to borrow money. They just wanted to live within the resources that they had. Some people might call it frugal, some people might call it cheap, but it was different in many ways than how we live today. So energy efficiency certainly fits into that. What we really want to do is to reduce the demand for energy. So you think about supply and demand. And so when I look at our energy use in our manufacturing plants, the best thing we can do is reduce the demand side so that we can operate our utilities at lower capacities. So one of the key things in our energy efficiency program was, when I became the energy manager, I found I didn't have a budget associated with it. When I went out and talked to people in manufacturing, many of them had ideas for how they could improve their energy efficiency, but they didn't have the money to do it. So I was able to collect all those ideas. Many of them had good returns, but they had not received funding. I showed a portfolio of those projects ranked by internal rate of return to the executive steering committee for this effort. And that day, I received $4.2 million to execute energy efficiency projects. As I showed good returns with the projects we did, that budget increased to over $8 million. So it's definitely a commitment to our energy program to have that capital budget. Next slide. The third lesson I'll mention is to be true to your values. My parents didn't believe in quitting something you had started. So one year I decided to play on a softball team, and I found out I was not only not very good at it, but I really didn't enjoy softball at all. But once I'd made the commitment to be a part of the team, my parents insisted that I attend every team, every game, and every practice, even if I sat on the bench. And I think that applies again to energy efficiency. We can't just rest on our laurels. We have to stay committed to what we start out to do. So early in my days as Eastman's energy manager, I knew there had been previous energy managers before me, and I didn't really know a lot about what they did. So I contacted one of the previous energy managers I knew. He was retired. I asked him if I could take him to lunch and talk about what energy management was in previous days. And what I found is that some of the things I was really proud of, the fact that I had justified this being a full-time job, the fact that I had established a capital budget, I thought these were really, great milestones. I found out we had had those things in the past, but we didn't maintain them. the priority of our energy efficiency effort in the past really shifted with energy cost. When energy prices were high, we spent a lot of time and effort reducing our energy use, focusing on efficiency. And then when prices went down, we lost a lot of that. We just didn't put the priority on it. So it's really important to maintain a consistent program. And I am confident that we're going to do that in the future because of external commitments we've made. And that includes both the commitment we made to reduce our energy intensity to the Department of Energy, as well as the sustainability goals that we have. I'll talk about those in a few minutes. Next slide. The last slide or last lesson I want to share is to plan for the future. So I was lucky growing up that my parents always talked about when I go to college. They never said if you go to college. They really believed in the value of an education. And so after I went to college, I think part of me thought I have my chemical engineering degree, I'm ready to go. Well, I found that wasn't enough. I eventually became a professional engineer. I pursued and obtained my certification in energy management and continue to learn every day. And so, I really credit that lifelong learning with helping me to be where I am today. In the same way, you have to plan for the future for the energy management program. It's important to have a system for it to be a rigorous system and not just depend on the people that are in the jobs. So there are several different energy management systems that can be used. We rely heavily on the Energy Star guidelines for energy management. This is something that's available if you're starting a program from scratch that you can use as sort of a how-to manual. You can also use it if you already have a program and look at any gaps that you may have.
Sharon,
Alan?
before you go further, just going to ask a question there about Energy Star. Can you explain a bit more about what that is and who runs it and those sort of issues?
Yes. So Energy Star is an environmental protection agency program. So I'm sure you've seen the little blue Energy Star logo on your refrigerator or your computer or things like that. In addition to certifying products, they also have an industrial program, and the industrial program is a program that offers webinars. They offer the guidelines for energy management. There are different awards that you can achieve with it. So it's been very instrumental to me being part of that network as I, revamp the energy program and as I have moved forward. Okay. Thank you. Please continue to interrupt if other things come up. Okay, so again, planning for the future, I mentioned the capital budget. So originally that was a one-time thing. Over time, the capital energy budget became part of the company's base budget. So I do not have to justify that budget every year. It is something that is a line item on Eastman's capital budget every year. We also developed standardized measures, and with those, we worked with the Department of Energy using linear regression and other analytical techniques. So in the past, we had looked just at energy intensity, which is the unit of how much energy it takes to make a pound of product. That does not take into account different production rates and different weather conditions. And so we've now increased the rigor of those measures with the help from the Department of Energy. We have better tools to monitor and optimize our energy use. We provide energy dashboards to manufacturing areas so they can see how they're performing. We have implemented a carbon price so that even in areas of the world where a carbon tax does not exist, the cost of carbon is considered in capital decisions. We want to engage our employees. We have training and awareness activities where we focus on energy efficiency, both at home and at work. And then finally, it's important to have structured programs to maintain the gains. So we put processes in place to make sure that energy efficiency projects continue to perform. All right, next slide. With that, I'm going to transition and start talking about climate change versus energy efficiency, although energy efficiency is a very key part of the decarbonization strategy. Sorry, I just saw it pop up. I don't recall off the top of my head what the cost of carbon is. So that is something I could follow up on, Alan, if you do communication after this, but I don't recall what we're using now.
So yeah, I'd like to have a follow-up question of my own for that, actually,
Okay.
if you're willing to
Sure.
field this,
Yes.
because I know that this whole issue of including carbon price in energy efficiency projects, and I understand I'm talking now about over the last 2 decades or more than that, when I was working more actively in that area, that was always a hard sell to management, because if it's not actually a price that you're paying that doesn't go to the bottom line, it's hard to say, well, actually, we're going to include this in our calculations. So how did you manage that in Eastman?
So that was actually our chief sustainability officer, and I thought he approached it in a very clever way. What he said is, if we don't include the cost of carbon, we're saying the cost of carbon is zero.
Mhm.
And, he sort of got agreement from people that zero is not the right answer. And so what he did is his approach was, let's decide on a low cost of carbon just to implement it, and then we'll increase it over time. So initially it was only $15 per metric ton, which is a really low number. The other thing I would say is we currently do those calculations for capital projects 2 ways. So one is with the cost of carbon and one is without. So, we have not transitioned to really including it in the absolute calculations. It's used to heighten awareness and hopefully influence decisions.
Sure. Great, thank you.
Okay. All right, so talking a little bit about our sustainability goals related to climate change. Our first goal is to reduce our absolute greenhouse gas scope 1 and 2 emissions by 1/3 by 2030 to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. So for anyone who may not be familiar with scope 1 and 2, scope 1 are all emissions produced on site. So that includes our combined heat and power plants, as well as our manufacturing operations. Scope 2 are emissions from any purchased energy. Most typically, that is purchased electricity, but some of our sites do sit in industrial parks where they purchase steam, and so that is included as well. Second, we want to increase our renewable energy use so that 100% of our purchased electricity in North America and Europe is renewable by 2030. I will point out, since we talked about combined heat and power, we do generate a lot of our own electricity, and we want to maintain that efficiency. And so that's why we've focused specifically on purchased electricity. Okay, next slide. So you may ask how we're doing. We have had a 16.3% reduction from 2017 to 2022 toward our 1/3 goal. And we have 14% of our purchased electricity renewable at this point. So we're well on our way for both of these goals. Okay. Next slide. So when we talk about carbon neutrality and how we're going to get there, energy efficiency is really the foundation of what we do. And as mentioned here, we've received multiple awards from both DOE and Energy Star for our energy efficiency program. The second lever that we talk about is process transformation. So this can mean, looking at making the products we make in a different way with a lower carbon footprint. It also includes a very new initiative that Eastman has for molecular recycling. So I don't have time to talk about that much today, but I do want to at least mention that we have recently built a world scale molecular recycling facility in Kingsport, where we recycle all kinds of hard to recycle plastics. So we believe mechanical recycling is still appropriate in many cases, but when it doesn't apply, we have the technologies to do that so that we're producing longer term products at a lower carbon footprint. Third is renewable energy. We've talked about that. And then fourth are the alternative technologies such as clean hydrogen, carbon capture, and any other emerging technology. Next slide. So I've said a couple of times how important energy efficiency is. So I won't go through this slide in detail, but I just wanted to show you that it's not just Eastman saying energy efficiency should be the first priority for decarbonization. many different organizations say that. So government organizations and McKinsey, who is a very well-respected consultant. So we have the case to say that energy efficiency is important. And one way we look at that is to look at the different kinds of categories that we consider for our energy efficiency projects. These are not total numbers. These are just examples from projects we've done, but you can see the annual savings, the CO2 reduction, and then we look at these projects in terms of how much does it cost to remove a metric ton of carbon. And these numbers, in some cases, are very, very low. In other cases, they still are quite a bit lower than what alternative technologies or comparable carbon taxes in Europe would be. So it is the most cost-effective way to reduce our carbon emissions. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about how we're structured, and then I want to talk about my role here. So we do have a sustainability council, which is made up of 4 of our top executives within the company who oversee all of sustainability, which of course is a very broad topic. Under that, we have 3 subcouncils, and I lead the environmental impact subcouncil, which includes a number of different working groups, one of those being the Sustainable Infrastructure Working Group. Under that, we have 4 work streams, and I also lead the energy efficiency work stream. So this sustainable infrastructure program has been defined to be a top corporate program, and we have had corporate strategy resources helping us to develop our plans. Next slide. So when we look at 2030, again, we have a 1/3 emission reduction goal. There are several things that we're looking at for that. So one thing we're doing is converting steam boilers, and this is something we actually started in the 2015 to 2020 timeframe, that we have used coal in the past, and we have gradually been eliminating our use of coal. So at this point, we only use coal at our largest facility in Kingsport. We've been transitioning to natural gas, but we are also aware that that does not help us toward our ultimate carbon neutrality goal, and so are continuing to look at other options for that. We also do quite a bit with optimization. I'm going to give you an example on that later. And again, we mentioned energy efficiency. Next slide. When it comes to 2050, the path to 2050 is much less known. In fact, I attended a meeting recently where a speaker from the Department of Energy said he believes that 60% of the technologies we need for decarbonization are not available today. And so we are continuing to look at what options there are, but we know that development of new technologies and improvement of existing technologies is needed. So just to mention a couple of those, I'd like to mention something about electrification. You know, we hear a lot about electrification, and that certainly has its place. However, you know, some of the things that may not be considered are the high temperatures that I mentioned earlier, as well as, you know, additional infrastructure for the grid to get the electricity to where it needs to be and to make the electricity. Carbon capture and sequestration is something that's talked about a lot. Something people may not realize about it is that not every area in the country is conducive to that. You have to have the right geological formations. And so we found that it is useful or potentially useful at some of our sites, but not others. And then we're continuing to watch, you know, what other companies are doing and what developments are occurring. So small modular nuclear reactors definitely have, you know, some advantages, but we're really seeing how those play out. And then we are making additional investments in our molecular recycling program because we're interested not just in reducing our own emissions, but in making products that reduce emissions for our customers.
And Sharon, I see there's a question in the chat that sort of relates to this because you didn't mention anything about hydrogen. Is that something you've been looking at as an energy source?
Yes, we are looking at hydrogen, and you know, there's all different colors of hydrogen. So we're exploring all that. We followed closely. You all may be aware, I believe Houston is one of the areas that got one of the DOE hubs for hydrogen. So we looked at that. There's not going to be one of those close to us. So we're still looking for ways to overcome the barriers to getting clean hydrogen. I think I saw in the chat somebody asked if we considered converting our boilers to that, and we have, but getting the clean hydrogen is still a hurdle for us.
Sure, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I'd like to talk about some of the challenges and headwinds. So, the technologies in many cases are very expensive. I already mentioned the concern about technology readiness. And then oftentimes these projects take 3 or more years for implementation. And so it's very difficult to do this quickly. Then there are some complicating factors. We are expecting some regulatory mandates. For instance, we've been looking at some of the SEC reporting requirements, and those are taking longer than we anticipated they would. There's still a lot of comments out there, so we don't know where they're going to head. So, those timelines and content are uncertain. As I mentioned, our chemical plants use high thermal loads, and so that was ideal for combined heat and power. But we know decarbonization may force shift to electrification. There are companies that are looking at electric boilers to get higher heat. So that's something we're continuing to monitor, but these high thermal loads are a challenge. And then finally, in our particular case, when we look at our boilers in particular, we have some boilers that are nearing the end of their engineering life. And so, we would like to defer decisions on replacing those boilers to let some of those technologies develop more, because we're starting to see reliability decline. So, it's a catch-22 where you want to go ahead and replace equipment for reliability, but you'd like to wait longer to see where the technology goes. So this is certainly not an easy problem. Next slide. So just to kind of start to wrap up here, again, energy efficiency is not the total answer for decarbonization, but it does really help with some of those other solutions we talked about, like electrification or carbon capture, all of those things. So, what we know is when you look at energy demand, higher demands mean more expensive equipment. And, some of the larger scale solutions aren't available. When we look at commercialization, some of the large equipment may lag smaller, more common sizes. Some of the regulatory requirements may be at least partially tied to solution size. And, if you have less demand, you may be able to extend the life of some of your existing assets if you're not running them as hard. So what we see is if we can really, double down on energy efficiency, that can decrease our overall costs for decarbonization, because the lower your demand is, the less expensive these longer term solutions are going to be. And so, that is why it is really the first thing you should focus on with decarbonization. Next slide. So to give a few examples of energy efficiency projects, there's a lot of equipment kind of things you could do. One thing I'm a big fan of is optimization, and I'm going to show you an example of optimization where we've really had a big impact at no capital cost. There are utility systems where we can improve the equipment by replacing older equipment with more efficient equipment or running it in a more efficient manner. There are some really simple things you could do. And I mean, these apply to not just industry, but any business or home, making sure you have good insulation. If you have air leaks, repair those. In our case, it's steam leaks. And then finally, in manufacturing, if you have waste heat from a process, can you take advantage of that? Can you change the interior configuration of a distillation column for chemical separations to make it more efficient? So what we see is, a lot of these things we can do and reduce our cost currently, while also making a better case for the longer term decarbonization goals. Next slide. So I do want to delve in deep here to one thing that we're particularly proud of. So as I've talked about, our Kingsport facility is an old plant. And it's a very big plant. So we're actually spending more than $100 million a year on purchased energy. And currently that means we're buying coal, natural gas, and electricity. That all flows into how we convert this energy into the utilities that we need within our plant. So you can see it is a very complex facility. If you were going to build a new combined heat and power plant, you would not build it like this today, but it's grown up over, well, we have some equipment that's as old as 60 years. We have gotten rid of our 100-year-old equipment. But we have 17 boilers, 19 turbine generators. I won't read the list, but many, many pieces of equipment. They're not all the same size. They don't all use the same fuel. And so we have written an optimization program that looks at the best path for each unit of energy passing through our system. So for every BTU of natural gas, coal, and electricity, what is the best path to get it through energy conversion to manufacturing and ultimately to our products? So this is something we're really proud of. We've actually reduced our total spend for utilities in Kingsport by about 4% using this optimizer. And we think there is a lot of additional opportunity for optimization in our chemical processes. I see there's a question. Yes, our turbines are steam driven. Yeah, that's how we make electricity. Okay, and then the last thing I wanted to mention here is our customers are starting to care a lot more about the life cycle assessment of our products. And so, all the energy efficiency that goes in does help to reduce the life cycle assessment of our product, and in some cases, make those products more appealing to our customers. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up here. There is a lot, as you can tell, on developing a roadmap to decarbonization. We have put a structure in place and the people in place to make this happen, but there are a lot of things that we depend on. Those external partnerships that I mentioned are very helpful. In addition to the program I already mentioned with the Department of Energy, we now participate in their Climate Challenge program. And, it's really great to have expertise from Department of Energy, the national labs that report to the Department of Energy, and other companies. We are creating a decarbonization roadmap, but we want to add optionality into that so that, we create the best solution for Eastman for the long term. And then we also are focused not just our own decarbonization, but how can we develop products and solutions that go beyond just Eastman. So I believe that's my last slide. Well, next slide. Yeah, so that is the end of my presentation. I know we've had a few questions. I'll be glad to answer any others. Alan?
Yeah, and Uwe, if you can also be checking chat, because I'm probably going to get involved in some discussions here myself. But I do see the one question here from William asking about, have you noticed an impact on boiler reliability with the optimization?
We have not. That is really not the intent of the optimization that we do. It's really optimization to reduce costs. There are other efforts with reliability and maintenance that are looking at those kind of issues, but that's not what we've looked at and not the intent of the optimization we're doing.
Okay, cool. So yeah, going back to the early part of your presentation, I did have a couple of questions. I'm not sure if I'll try to address both of them, but the one in particular that I've heard several discussions with some of our students about is, okay, so you're an engineer. I mean, that's my background too. That's my degree. Do you think of yourself now as an engineer or a manager, and how do you distinguish between those two roles?
Yeah, I do think of myself more as a manager, but when I think about management, there's people management and program management. So I do have some people working for me, but I consider myself much more of a program manager. And that's because, I have only a limited number of people working for me, but I have a lot of influence across the company with, through the Environmental Impact Sustainability Subcouncil that I lead, through the energy efficiency efforts, working with process improvement engineers, staff engineers, and even representing Eastman outside the company with Energy Star and Department of Energy. So yeah, I still like I guess I find what I like is I still like dealing with technical people, but I don't like doing the technical work myself as much.
It's funny how age does that to all of us. So how do you view those different career paths? Do you have any thoughts on that you'd like to share with the students? Or are they distinct career paths? I mean, there are obviously overlaps all the way, but
Yeah, there are overlaps, and I think it's really just finding what you like to do.
sure.
So, I was a manager and pursuing, a management career path. And then I just, midway through my career, got really interested in this energy efficiency. They asked me to lead the worldwide energy team. And I remember at the time, my boss said, they just meet an hour a month. It's not a big deal. But then when I started seeing all the stuff we could do and pursuing that, it became my full-time job. And so at some point I had to make that decision. Am I going to go with energy efficiency, or am I going to stay on the management track? And I just found I was so fascinated by the energy efficiency work. It was an easy decision. So one advice I like to give people is, particularly early in your career, if you see people doing jobs you find are interesting, talk to them and find out how they got there and learn about those jobs. So, I think it just comes down to what you're interested in doing. I find I really enjoy what I do. And I think, that's fantastic that I enjoy what I do and find it interesting every day.
Yeah, and actually, I remember our first speaker. I'm not sure if you were able to join us for the first webinar, but Ray Bonato was talking about basically, love the work, find your passion, and I think there's something in that. It's great if you can come to work and you really want to be here. This is something you want to do.
Yeah,
which I guess,
absolutely.
I mean, obviously, we all like to have well-paid jobs and respect and all that kind of stuff. But in the end, if you're trying to do stuff you don't really enjoy, what's the point?
Yeah, agreed.
Uche, are there other questions in the chat now that we can take?
Yeah, yeah. We have another question here. I think is interesting. This is from Jonathan. He says, "I've heard about direct air capture, which can be described as working like a large air dryer. How do you think Eastman would be able to incorporate these add-ins into 2030 or beyond?"
Yeah, so we're really not pursuing direct air capture. We have streams that have carbon dioxide in them. And so, just in general, it's more cost effective to capture carbon from a carbon rich stream than directly from the air. So I think there is a place for direct air capture. I know DOE is doing research on that, but it's not something we're going to pursue. We have other more cost effective options available.
More questions, Uche?
Yes, yes, I think we have one also for Kenneth. It says, how do you see AI and digital innovation impacting Eastman's efforts in optimization for energy efficiency? And also, how do you see it impacting your managerial efforts on a personal level?
Yeah, I'm excited about AI, and I do see options for that. So a couple of the guys in my group who, work on optimization are really exploring what they can do with AI. I'll mention one thing they're working on where they're incorporating some of that I think is really fascinating is, there's so many different options for decarbonization with varying levels of cost and technology readiness and applicability. And so they're developing optimization around what's the optimal decarbonization solution. And they've been telling me as they're writing the code for that, sometimes they can just tell Chat or Copilot, that's the one we use, to write code that does a certain thing. And so they're able to really expand how quickly they can develop this software. And sometimes if they have an error, they'll cut a portion of the code and put it in Copilot and say, find the error. So I'm really finding it to be a great tool to make our engineers more effective. And then just personally, I don't use AI a lot, but I have used it for a few things, where I'm writing things and I'm trying to find just the right word. So, I think there's a lot of potential there. I think we're still figuring out what the potential is.
And I see there's another question about new technologies on a different frontier. What are your thoughts? And this may be out in left field to you, but have you thought about biomicrobes being genetically modified for chemical waste cleanup, bioremediation efforts? Is that part of your sustainability hat?
No, not really. I do think it's interesting. I did hear a presentation I thought was really interesting where someone was growing, it was some kind of, I think it was some kind of moss, I want to say, that captured carbon. So I don't know. I think it's really interesting, but it's just not something I'm involved in at all.
Mm. Again, want to go back to the early part of your presentation again, and this could get us into some thorny territory, but I'm intrigued. You commented coming out of the Great Depression era, and I mean, we're of a similar generation. Let's let's note this. So, do you see there being significant changes in priorities and values, and do you think that is affecting the way business works these days? So, this is a
That's an
bigger
interesting
question, I know.
question.
Yeah, this could keep us going a while.
Yeah, I guess I would say, I feel like I really do feel that, my childhood and growing up with the parents I had really influenced how I see things. What I see with new engineers coming in now is I think they're so aware of these sustainability issues, which weren't even a part of our discussion,
Sure.
10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so I see so much interest in the new engineers and how they can contribute. And that's something I really try to do with new engineers is sometimes I wish I was working on sustainability. And I tell them, hey, if you're doing an energy efficiency project, you are working on sustainability. Mm-hmm. So I think it's part of my responsibility to show that link so that we can, again, back to that passion, how can we tie in the interests they have and show them how they can contribute? I don't know if that answered your question at all.
No, but it's a good. I mean, a lot of the discussion you hear, obviously, people have their own perspectives and their own biases, and I know a lot of the discussion. Don't hear it so much these days, but 5-10 years back, hear a lot of things saying, "Oh, the young people don't have the same work ethic." But obviously, there are different priorities that are out there too. It's around what do we consider important. And obviously, doing a good job at work is one of those things if you're sensible. But there are other things like work-life balance and so on, and obviously the whole issue of sustainability, which is not necessarily present in every work environment, which are important priorities too.
I do hear a number of our young engineers who come say they chose Eastman because of what we're doing in sustainability. So I do think it's affecting hiring decisions for people.
Sure. On both sides of that equation, yeah, to be sure.
Yeah.
Uche, is there another question there?
Yes, we got something from Reza. It says that by optimization, do you mean mathematical optimization? I guess that's what it's asking.
Yes, I do mean mathematical optimization. And, one of the challenges with that, like when I was talking about what we're trying to do about optimize our decarbonization pathway is you have to put a numerical value on everything to be able to do mathematical optimization. And so that's something we've had a lot of discussion around is, we think to be a sustainable company, that improves our reputation. But what is that improvement in reputation worth? So it's a mathematical optimization, but it's very challenging to put a mathematical number on everything so you can get to that optimal solution.
I mean, that obviously works much better if you're looking at optimizing your plant operations.
Yeah.
And you can, I mean, actually, going back to my history, many, many years ago, the company that I was with back then set up one of the first steam system optimization programs. And I think it took several hours to run. But nowadays, that's very common technology out there, and obviously a lot quicker to run and much more automated.
Yeah. And, when I talked about our steam electric optimizer, its goal is just to reduce the cost. And so, we know what it's doing. When we look at the decarbonization pathway, we've also had conversations. What do we want to optimize? Do we want to optimize or a minimal capital cost, a minimal operating cost, the earliest decarbonization? So it's not nearly as obvious. What do we want to optimize? What defines optimization?
Right. Yeah. I guess the original models I'm talking about were looking at instantaneous minimum operating cost on a steam system, which is not easy to calculate, but yeah, you're right. There are much bigger things you can optimize.
Right.
So there's one more question I see here, and we're coming close to our time now. But anyway, this one is from Kapsu. Is that how you pronounce that? Could you go over some of the carbon removal processes from various streams? Where do you store the carbon byproduct? Are you ready at a point where you can store it at this point, Sharon?
No. So and I apologize if my title was misleading. I'm not really removing carbon. I'm reducing carbon would probably have been more accurate.
Sure.
So at this point, we're not really removing carbon. We are looking at options for carbon capture technologies, but that's not something we're currently implementing. And then we are looking at storage options. Like I mentioned, those are available in some parts of the country, not others. The other new thing that we've just begun is looking at, carbon. How can you use that carbon that's captured?
Sure.
It would be really ideal if you wouldn't put it in the ground, but you could use it to make other products.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's obviously a big subject.
Right.
Yeah. Any other questions here? I think we're pretty much at our time now, but we'll throw one other question at you, and this is something that really just comes from my own observations in industry over the years that I've been involved there. An impression that I've had is that in many parts of industry, energy efficiency has sort of been downplayed rather recently because people are so focused on decarbonization. And there are sometimes some nice big numbers you can get in decarbonization by, for example, changing to renewable electricity. So, hey, I got my decarbonization numbers by buying some RECs for renewable energy. And therefore, people in some companies have actually de-incentivized energy efficiency because they're looking to get a big number on decarbonization instead. Have you encountered that? Am I imagining it?
That is probably true in some areas. I would say it's not true for Eastman. One thing we talk a lot about is, are renewable energy credits going to be a good long-term solution? Are people going to be satisfied with that 10 years from now? So in our mind, it's, if you do energy efficiency and reduce your demand, it's sort of a no regrets option.
Sure.
It's going to help us for anything. And in many cases, it has good payback and reduces cost. Right. So we really feel like that's the right thing to do. The other thing that comes into play is, there are carbon offsets you can buy. Well, carbon offsets cannot be used to reduce the life cycle assessment of a product. And many of our customers care about the LCA, not just our total carbon emissions as a company. So we think about that as well.
Great. Excellent. Thank you for that useful response.
Yeah.
Okay, we're coming towards the hour. So at that point, Sharon, I'll say thank you very much. This is a great presentation, some wonderful insights that you've shared there. I know, again, for many of our students who are not necessarily involved in engineering or working in industry, this might have seemed like a sort of foreign territory, but I hope you've learned a lot, whatever your background's here, and some wonderful insights that you can take with you. So thanks again. And next slide, please, before I forget. Maybe we're having problems advancing, but I just wanted to remind you, if you did not pick it up earlier, the hydrogen symposium coming up, and I just put the link again in the chat if you want to register for that. I think it's going to be a great event coming up in April. So with that, I think we will call this the end, and thank you very much all for joining us. And at this point, we will shut off the recording.